Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Readings and Thoughts from the Scriptures. We are now in 2025, so this is the first video of a new year, and we are in a new chapter in the book of Romans. We've been going through Romans, reading through Romans, and I've been sharing some thoughts about what we read, and we are now in Romans chapter 3, and we'll be looking at verses 1 through 8. But just by way of review, we've been in the book of Romans for several videos. At this point, we've looked at Paul's longing to visit Rome, God's wrath against sinful humanity, God's righteous judgment, the Jews and the law, and now we come to looking at God's faithfulness as Paul brings the first part of Romans to a point, not a conclusion, but a point, dealing with universal sin and unfaithfulness in the human race, whether it's Jewish unfaithfulness or Gentile unfaithfulness. And now we come to looking at God's faithfulness. So the gospel, as Paul says in chapter 1, is the power of God unto salvation for all those who believe, to the Jews first and also to the Greek. He has to paint, and that's good news, right? That's the gospel, that's good news. But before we totally understand the good news, we have to understand the bad news. And the bad news is that we're all sinners, Jews, Gentiles. And so before the good news becomes good news and is accepted by Jewish background believers and pagan background believers, we have to examine the bad news, which we have done in the first two chapters of the book of Romans. Now we come to a slight change. God's faithfulness, Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. What advantage, then, Paul writes, is there in being a Jew? So this is following up on that last section, the Jews and the law. Or what value is there in circumcision? Much in every way, he says. First of all, the Jews have been entrusted with the very words of God. So everything that was written in the New Testament was founded upon scriptures from the Old Testament. The Old Testament, from the very beginning, testifies of the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth being the Christ. And so that's the foundation, and that's what Paul's referring to much in every way. First of all, the Jews have been entrusted with the very words of God, the Old Testament scriptures. What if some were unfaithful? Now that's not referring to the words of God. God's word's never unfaithful. But to those who are Jewish background believers, what if some were unfaithful? Unfaithful to the law, unfaithful to God. Will their unfaithfulness nullify God's faithfulness? Well, absolutely not. That's a ridiculous statement. We do not create God in our image. He created us in his image. He is always faithful. We are the ones, Jew or Gentile, who find ourselves unfaithful, and that's the point that the apostle's trying to make. Not at all, he says, verse 4. Let God be true, and every human being a liar. And essentially, in one way or another, every human being is a liar. As it is written, and here he quotes from Psalm 51, verse 4. So that you may be proved right when you speak and prevail when you judge, referring to God's judgment and his faithfulness. But if our unrighteousness brings out God's righteousness more clearly, what shall we say? That God is unjust in bringing his wrath on us? I am using a human argument. Certainly not. If that were so, how could God judge the world? Someone might argue, if my falsehood enhances God's truthfulness and so increases his glory, why am I still condemned as a sinner? That's rationalistic thinking. That's man-centered thinking. That's pagan thinking, actually. Why not say, as some slanderously claim that we say, let us do evil that good may result? Well, their condemnation is just. So says the Apostle Paul. More to come as we continue to share these readings and thoughts with you from the Scriptures in 2025. Much to think about in the book of Romans. So until next time, seek to remain faithful to God, for God's faithfulness is always extended to us.